Hey there! Thank you for tuning in to Chats with Hannah. Today we'll be chatting with Dr. Franzina Coutinho. She's an occupational therapist with a PhD in OT Neuro Rehab. It's such a joy to have you with us, Dr. Franzina. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, today our topic is actually chosen by our viewers, and I am so grateful. Thank you for your suggestions. Please let them keep coming in. Our topic for today is how do you manage behaviors or tantrums or sensory meltdowns in children? Now, when we talk about behaviors, I want you to think about a plant, right? So the behaviors are like the leaves in a plant. So if the leaves are sort of like drooping, you know that the plant needs more water. Or if it's sort of bending in a certain direction, there's a possibility that it needs more sunlight. If you find a branch of leaves sort of withering away, there's a possibility the root is rotting. So basically, the leaves are diagnostic to what's happening at the root level of the plant or the tree. And behavior is like that in children. It's diagnostics to what's actually happening at a deeper level. And as parents, we really need to be tuned in, because more often we find ourselves trying to correct certain behaviors, not realizing, hey, what is actually triggering this behavior, and finding the root cause of that and working at that level. So today we're actually going to be talking one of the root causes of a meltdown that could be sensory related. For that, Dr. Franzina, I'm so glad that you're going to be sharing light on this topic. So even as we begin, would you shed light on just the different sensory systems in our body and how it impacts the body overall?
So I'm going to talk about our sensory systems and the difference between that and what sensory processing is, right? So we have our eyes, our ears, our skin, and these are primarily our sense organs. But when we talk about sensory processing, it's basically the way these organs carry information to our brain. What that would mean was a child, looking at people around or television, is seeing with his eyes, but is registering what he's seeing or understanding what he's seeing through the visual processing system that goes to a particular part of the brain, understands it, and then he laughs if there's a joke, or he gets afraid if there's something scary. That's basically what processing is. All right. So we have six primary sensory processing areas. I'll talk about them a little more in detail. The most important and largest probably is the tactile system. What this is basically all the information that goes in through our skin. So for a child, that would be, you have kids at two ends. One kid would be the one who doesn't like the glue and the sand and stuff like that, and is like, yuck. Wouldn't want to walk on or get his feet dirty. And then you have the other one who's touching everything, playing with stuff. And I have twins that are 6 years old, so I've seen both ends of the spectrum there. So that's your tactile system. You then have the vestibular system, which is your balance system, which is located between your ears. All right. So what happens here is this system basically helps you stay upright and keep your body in a state of arousal so that you can register all the information from the environment around you. What happens if you have an inefficient vestibular system would be that you'll be slouched, lethargic, leaning against something, or you could be all over the place jumping. The kids that are typically labeled hyperactive, it's not as simple as the way I'm putting it, of course. But the kids who are constantly bouncing around all over the room, right? Then you have kids who like smells. So this is the olfactory system, which is just registering the types of smells that you have. The gustatory, which is the taste that you taste. We have kids that constantly are smelling hair, smelling mom's clothes, and that's because it's a calming sensation for them. You have kids who like really sour things. So as a reward to my 6-year-old daughter, khatta things or sour things are basically what work for her. These are extreme tastes that are calming to her and help her feel better. So that's the type of sensory processing orally that works for her. All right. You then have the proprioceptive system. What this is basically where your body is in space. So it's the information that's carried from between our joints, and that our brain then understands that I'm standing, or I have to move my hand forward, or whatever type of position you're placing your body in. And the last and the most recent one that's got a lot of traction now, I think, is the interoceptive system. What this is um, it's basically the receptors from inside your body that tell you how you're feeling internally. So this would probably be, kids who are constipated or kids who don't realize when they have to go to the bathroom. It's because their interoceptive system is not working as well as it should. And there are various techniques to help activate the system and get them better, but that's a completely different topic all by itself. So these are the different sensory systems. Now, when we have difficulty processing sensory information, um, or if we are not in a state of harmony with our sensory systems, we could have a meltdown that's called a sensory meltdown. Now, I think it's important to highlight the difference between what a tantrum is and what a sensory meltdown is. Tantrums are common, right? You have your 2, 3, 4 year olds who are going to throw tantrums because they need or want something. What helps a tantrum get better is understanding what the need is, having your child develop adequate language for communicating. I think the younger the child is, the more prone they are to having tantrums because they don't know how to express what they're thinking of. And I think the final piece then to that is, them wanting things they don't necessarily need, but realizing that if I cry for 20 minutes, my parents are going to give in. So that's the learned behavior that you have there, right? Um, in opposition to that, a sensory behavior or a sensory meltdown is when one of your systems goes into overdrive, right? So, for example, you could have a child at kindergarten or with his friends on the playground. It's just rained and it's super mucky, and they're just really really upset because their feet are dirty, and over a period of time, because their tactile system is over registering the amount of information in the brain, they cry and have a meltdown, and that's not going to get better until you clear their feet, you wash them off and calm them down in whatever way you figured out. um, there's a fine line between this being common with most kids to it being a regular problem. And Hannah, I don't know how much in depth you would like me to go there, but in terms of kids otherwise having sensory processing difficulties resulting in a tantrum, it would be if you're in a classroom and you're making a line to go out into the playground, and you have somebody come and just stand really close to you. That could cause a meltdown in a child, and cause him to hit, punch, push, resulting just in a cascade effect. But it's a sensory problem in itself that's caused the bad behavior. So it's not really bad behavior because he's being bad, but because there's a sensory deficit somewhere that's causing all these issues, right? So these are some examples of things that might happen. You could see kids who have difficulty even with the glue and the clay and stuff like that, and teachers just thinking they're being fussy when in reality it's the texture that's causing the problem, and it's not because they don't want to, it's because it's upsetting to them and it's causing a real reaction in their brain. So science has also shown, this is evidence, right, where adults with sensory processing difficulties have been asked, like some of them have had haircut difficulties, and they've spoken about how it felt like pins poking them every time their hair was being cut. And these are their words. So it's upsetting to them because it's painful, because it's uncomfortable for them, and not because they're trying to get out of something just like that. So I think it's important to know the difference between these two things.
Yeah. I think you've explained that so well. It's just sort of simplified it. And the thing about meltdowns or, tantrums is like it's reached that end limit, right? The threshold of the child, and that's when they're breaking down. But I
Right.
think often for parents, we notice it in small amounts as well, right? And it's good to be aware of it, like you mentioned, right? Like sometimes kids are really, they don't like their hair being combed, or they don't like their hair being touched, or even like cut, or like hair wash, and you notice those patterns. You notice patterns with them feeling really icky with their fingers. They don't want to touch things. I think one of the things also is that sometimes when kids come back from school, they have this whole like crying and all of that. And sometimes it's possible because of the sensory overload that they have in school, that they're sort of receiving, and they're having to put themselves together, that actually when they're home they're just like letting their guard down and just
Right.
you know uh, letting them out. I think smell, like even how you mentioned, just the whole thing of smells, I think these are quite hidden sensory things, right? And sometimes with overloading smells, when especially when kids are not able to sort of even use words to explain like what is irritating them. So I think for parents to be able to really understand and just be tuned into, okay, I see a pattern here, or like why is it happening, just sort of even reduces going to the sensory meltdown phase, right? Like
Correct.
to be able
Correct.
to understand. So I think you've really uncovered that really beautifully for us. So thank you so much.
Right.
So, when we talk about sensory, there's this term that we use called self-regulation, right? Would you able to like help us understand what is self-regulation in kids?
Sure. So your sensory system, you have kids who think of it as a line, right? So you have kids who are at two ends of the spectrum, where the middle is supposed to be what we call normal, and then you have kids who are over responding to all the sensory stimulation that they get at one end, and at the other end they're not responding enough. Okay. So when we say regulate, it means that we want them somewhere in the middle, where they're in a calm state, able to receive information from people and things around them. So let me give you an example. If you have a child who has difficulties with loud noises, right, and now with online TV, I was going to say, with online school and stuff like that, there's a lot of it happening, right? But if you have the teacher at a particular pitch, like talking really loudly, um, it's probably going to impact the child who has an auditory, who has a hearing hypersensitivity, not to be able to follow the instructions that are being told to him or her, because all they can hear is blah 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 blah. Like it's a high pitched, irritating noise to them, and it's not instruction. Now, this is a very dramatic for effect example that I'm giving you, but regulation or self regulation is the ability for child to figure out that the teacher is talking too loud, so I'm going to make the volume lower, or I'm feeling really sleepy, so I'm going to go jump on the couch 10 times and come back, or um, you know I feel I feel like I'm just like really upset and I want to cry right now, so I'm probably going to go roll in the bed, close the door, and be all by myself for 10 minutes. So these type of behaviors that a child figures out are calming to them, requires a state of fairly good understanding of self, right? And this happens. I mean, these are parenting techniques that you can start with your kids at a very young age, asking them to use their words to express how they are feeling, and talk to them about, oh, you look upset right now, what are some of the things that we can do that might make you feel better, and give them options to begin with, allowing them to eventually figure out, oh, this is how I'm feeling, so let me see if I can do this to make myself calmer, right? That being said, it doesn't work all the time, but it's a good start, right? To get you
Hmm.
from point A to point B, and then figure out how much help you need to get to point C. So, like I said, I have 6-year-olds, and I have my daughter who's like really loud and quite hyperactive, and I have my son who's auditory hypersensitive and tactile hypersensitive. So, as an OT, that's what I'm doing. I'm just figuring out all these kinds of problems that my kids have.
Yes.
But I feel like that helps me address issues a little better. And, so this concept of use your words, tell me what's happening. Okay, so, you're jumping around too much. What do you think you can do? These are simple things that happen fairly quickly. Um, so I think that's language that you can incorporate and help kids self-regulate better. It's really important, I think. So yeah,
Yeah.
good question.
Yeah, I think that is really key, right? Communicating and helping your child communicate. Um, Even if they're not at a level to use words yet, there are different other things that you can use to help them communicate,
Exactly,
right? And
exactly.
yeah, and I think that is really key. Thank you for mentioning that. Um, so my next question is, um, what are some common behavioral patterns that you would observe in children that have an underlying sensory need? Now, I know you have mentioned that a little bit, but could you just expand on that more?
Um, so so talking about really young kids, right? So I think the messy play is something that we encourage in kids right now a lot, especially when they're younger, because this helps with just in terms of tolerating different textures and understanding their body and the position in space. It helps them a lot. So I think probably we have a lot of helicopter parenting that happens where a child is playing and then starts crying. The parent will pick them up and say, oh, you don't like it, let's wash up and go away. I would say push them maybe a minute beyond their tolerance level, right? And that's tactile play right now. And progressively expose them to different textures for longer periods of time. Okay. So this would be the tactile system. Then you have kids who don't like sitting on the swing or going down slides. So to me, it's like take them to those places, expose them to it, push them a little bit, not so much where it creates a really like it's a traumatic place for them, but don't let it be, right? Don't let them say, oh, I don't want to sit on it, or let's do count to 10 and try and sit on it today, or let's try and sit on it for 15 counts today. So I think gentle nudges is probably what we need to do there. um, but you could have kids who don't like sitting on that or going to the park barefoot or doing messy play. As they get older, you have kids who don't like loud noises. So the teacher shouting at somebody else, now this could be just not liking the teacher shout at somebody else, right? But very often you'd see it in other ways as well, where there's a pressure cooker or a dog barking, and the kid's like covering his ears because it's hurtful for them. Um, and I think, honestly, as a therapist, this is probably one of the most difficult things to get rid of or solve the auditory hypersensitivity. You have many um, non evidence based treatment things that are going around. But to me, again, I think any of the sensory systems need exposure, right? Whether you have neurotypical or non-typical kids, exposure is probably just what you need to consistently do with them, and over a period of time it does get better. So yeah, I think I cannot highlight enough the requirement for messy play involving the hands, because any child eventually going to school is going to need to use their hands for writing and hold a pencil. So that's definitely going to impact the writing skills as well. So you need to keep that in mind in your really young ones as well. I'm not sure I
Yeah.
answered that in a really roundabout way, but yeah, that's
No,
that.
that's great. In fact, as you were sharing, it sort of reminded me of my elder one is 3 years old now, but I remember, and I think it's also because of our OT background that we constantly have this, right? So when we're looking at something like, hey, I cannot let this be, or I think this is going to lead to this. So anyway, so when she was younger, like I noticed, like she hated the swing. Like she would just cry, and it was so we would throw her up in the air. She's really happy. I would spin her around. She's fine. But the moment I put her into the swing, there would just be this crying and this pushing. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I need to work on this. We have to like do this. I remember like doing the counting with her. But okay, we do 5 counts. And I would sit with her and she would be on my lap. And she's like really young, not even a year old. I'm like swinging with her. Okay, we count 5. And then the next time we went to the park, okay, let's do a little longer. And I remember like when she was possibly 2 years old, and she actually sat on the swing and was enjoying it. And that for me, that moment was like, yay! Like we've managed
We've
to
done
work
it.
on this together. Yeah. So
Yeah.
but I know that in those moments, like when your kids don't want to engage with something, it's easy to, um, sort of just like, okay, fine, let it be. But to actually expose them, engage with them, sit with them in that mess. And I think often it's like for us parents getting our hands messy, right?
Right,
And sort of
right.
telling them that it's okay. Because usually we are like, oh, it's so dirty. Like you want to go and wash your hands, but actually be like, okay, no, I'm not going to wash my hands. I'm going to do this and I'm going to help you do this with me.
Right.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. I think it was really easy to uncover and understand. Um, so, like you've mentioned, like things that even parents need to like just observe and be aware of certain patterns that their children are falling into, and so they can help them better. So, what are 5 tips or strategies that you would suggest for parents who are struggling with sensory meltdowns or their kids having sensory overloads in certain areas?
Um, so this is something I started paying more attention to as a parent, I guess. But if you feel there's something happening and can't figure out what it is, I think you need to write things down, right? So figuring out what a trigger is really, really key in helping your child, right? So you're not going to just shush them and it's going to magically disappear. It's not, because this is neurological. We're going to like retrain the brain and figure out, like go backward, so to speak, right? And figure out what the problem is. So I think keeping a diary and figuring out what the triggers are is really, really important. Um, Exposing your kid to a particular sensory experience is really important. I know it's bizarre, but I hate getting wet in the rain. That's my sensory thing. Like I cannot. My husband, on the other hand, loves it. So that's his job. Like he has to take the kids down. They run around. They get wet in the rain. And that goes against everything in my being. To stop them and say, "Go play," but they do it, and I think that's a behavior that they are not going to have because of me, because I'm so yeah with the water. So I'm not saying go get wet in the rain. That's not what I'm saying. But like get outside your sensory safe zone as well, because what might be X in you might be X raised to 10 or amplified in your child. And the only way to get them more comfortable in their skin is by exposing them to things. um, the third thing is, I would say, incorporate about 2 to 3 hours. I know it sounds like a lot in a week in sensory play. So it doesn't need to be 1 hour every day, but 30 minutes, you know, over 7 days is fairly reasonable, I think. And you can do it in so many different ways now with all the stuff that's available. Um, Four is use a lot of open-ended play that has a lot of texture. I think, blocks, and I'm not a big fan of Play-Doh. Clay, yes, Play-Doh not so much. But anything that offers some resistance to hands and can be manipulated is a godsend. Um, I think all in all, this would be my very general advice to parents out there to help them, build on their sensory play skills, and that will translate into so many different things for them. And use your
Yeah.
words. Yeah, tell your kids to use their words. I think that should have been the first one. So have them use their words. Yeah.
Oh, so you mentioned something really interesting that I don't think many would know. What is the difference between Play-Doh and clay?
So Play-Doh is that soft. You have the brand Play-Doh. It's really soft. It's really pliant. There's no resistance offered. You can mold it into anything. So there is some amount of texture offered there, but there's no resistance. There's nothing else that can be accomplished, which you could probably with clay. So if you are doing something like Play-Doh, I would say do kinetics, do different variants of the same thing. You can do all of these at home. Oobleck, kinetic sand. You can make Play-Doh at home. I'm not a big fan of the Play-Doh that you get outside. Clay is resistive. It's like 80 rupees for a small pack. Your kid's gonna work at it, stretch it, mold it, and there's so much more that can be like the benefits for the same amount of time that you spend with Play-Doh versus with clay would be exponential, is what I think,
Oh,
especially in really young kids. So I think I think under supervision, of course, you do that even with Play-Doh. But this is something that you could easily substitute over time,
hmm.
and have them. I think they'd be more tolerant to Play-Doh as well because it's not as sticky. Play-Doh is too sticky and overwhelming, I think, personally. So, yeah.
Okay. That's good to know. Thank you. Um, so like, suppose parents have tried these strategies, right? And it's still not resolving. What is the next step? What should they do?
You need to go make an appointment with your occupational therapist. Your pediatrician is going to say, oh, no, don't worry, he or she is going to outgrow it. I will say, no, like you need to go visit your OT. It's like with everything, right? These are non visible soft signs that result in things later on that are not beneficial. So I feel the earlier you catch it, the faster you get strategies to deal with them at home. It can only benefit you.
Mm, that's right, because it has repercussing sort of effects, right? And so
Absolutely.
actually
Absolutely.
working at it while it is a little bit can actually help,
So
even
much.
if it's a lot, it's easier to work that through. Yeah, thanks for sharing. So, do you have a story you'd like to share with us?
No, I think, as a therapist, I am fairly sensory avoidant myself. And my kids have actually taught me how to explore more and, be more imaginative in my sensory play. So we now make oobleck at home. We do kinetic sand at home, and it's been a fun journey that way. So um, it's interesting. So, like I said, I have twins. They're 6, and my son would never ever eat like sour things ever. Right? To him, it was overwhelming or something that he would tolerate. But because my daughter loves it so much, he's now started trying it out. So I think that just reinforces as a parent, you see it firsthand. But the sensory exposure over time, the more you see people around you doing things, whether it's yourself or other people, it can only be helpful. So I can't stress that enough. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you. Exposure, exposure, exposure. Like that is like the first question you ask yourself. Is your child actually exposed to something? And
Right.
then second, yeah, that is awesome. So I'm so glad. I've really enjoyed this chat with you, Franzina. So just as we end, what would you like to encourage the parents with, or what are your closing thoughts or comments?
I mean, I want to tell every parent that you've got it, right? Like you just need to keep at it. It's baby steps. I may be an OT. I probably did it for 15 years before I had my kids. It's still a learning process. So, nobody has the answers immediately all the time, no matter how many books you read. And it's never too late, right? You have a problem, that's what I tell my parents. Is it too late? If I'm ever asked that question, you're never too late, right? The brain is plastic, your child has capacity constantly, so you just need to push baby steps and you get where you need to be. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much. So, Dr.
thank you.
Franzina has her center in Mumbai. It's called Inspirium Holistic Care, and she offers occupational therapy, speech therapy, and physiotherapy at her center. So, if you need to get in touch with her, I'm going to be tagging her in this video, and you can reach out to her or reach out to me, and we will, try and help you out or answer your questions together. But this has been a fun chat. Thank you
Thank you
again.
for having me. Yeah.